Welcome, friends, to this episode of the Sync Your Life podcast, where I'm joined by my friend, Ahna Fulmer. Ahna this is not her first time on the show. She's been on here before. If I remember correctly, we actually did quite the soapbox moment about ditching the scale on our previous episode. She's a health and wellness enthusiast. She's got a personal brand regarding things like do-it-yourself projects at home, health and wellness, and lots of things in the works. But I'm so excited to meet with her today to talk to her specifically about her sort of newish journey into the world of adoption. So as you guys know, this is November, which is National Adoption Month. So every episode of the podcast this month is dedicated to the topic of adoption. Some solo rounds with me, and then some interviews like today with Ahna. So I'm going to be diving deep into the questions that people want to know. We're going to be talking about their journey as a family as they look to internationally adopt. And I'm excited to offer her angles and perspectives on this journey. She has a background in fundraising for adoption. And I know that's a question I get often from adoptive couples is how can I lessen the costs for myself? Because adoption isn't cheap, right? So we're going to talk about that too. So without further ado, Ahna, welcome back to the show. I'll have you just kick things off by telling my audience who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, it is a privilege to be back on here. Jenny has been on my podcast twice as well. We enjoy talking to each other. That's the bottom line. I am Ahna Fulmer. I am a DIY healthy lifestyle blogger. My background is in emergency medicine, actually. I am one of those pivot in career type of women. I was in medicine for 15 years, worked in the ER for 10. I'm a dual certified nurse practitioner and am a DIY connoisseur, all of the things. I love to try to figure it out myself. So that transitioned into being a virtual fitness and nutrition coach, as well as a blogger. I also have my own podcast, Imperfectly Empowered, where we talk all about inspiring stories and equip you with expert advice. We are also adopting. I have 3 biologically. I have Gracie 10, Caleb 8, Lillian 5, and then our son to come from the Pacific island of Samoa. And he will be between the ages of 2 and 5 when we are matched, God willing, sometime next year. It's very surreal. He's coming.
Yeah. I remember when we first connected, and yes, we do like talking to each other. We were about 40 minutes behind when we were supposed to hit record because we were just chit-chatting. But I know when we first talked and Ahna told me that her family was looking to adopt and it was coming in the future, I was intrigued by that. And I was intrigued by everything that they're doing to get to that point. So I'd love for you to sort of take my listeners through the journey that you've had so far. Like what led you to wanting to adopt? What was that conversation maybe like with your spouse? Is that something you've always wanted to do? And then what were the first steps that you guys took?
So we have always been passionate about adoption, the process, the beauty of it, the idea of giving a child a forever family who otherwise might not have one. But it was not something that either of us felt called to from the beginning. So my husband and I have been married for 11 years. Can't even remember. I don't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So bear with me. But yeah, it was something that we were always very passionate about supporting. Anytime a family member or a friend knew somebody adopting, we were quick to support that, but it was not something that I personally felt like I was meant to do. I have said this before, I was very, very blessed to have healthy babies, healthy pregnancies. I also got pregnant very, very easily. So in my head at the time, adoption was something for a woman who struggled to get pregnant or struggled with infertility. It wasn't something that I necessarily thought of as an avenue for my family. And that wasn't incorrect. That is true. A lot of women end up adopting because of infertility or struggles getting pregnant, but it was very incomplete. This idea that somehow I shouldn't adopt because I could so easily get pregnant, and that it's ultimately a child we're talking about, not whether or not a woman who can have children easily should adopt. So that was a mindset that has certainly shifted over the last several years. But initially, it was not on the table. And then after I had my third, We always wanted four. My husband and I always agreed. And for whatever reason, I could not get past the feeling that I was done biologically having kids. I just remember bringing Lillian home from the hospital and thinking, like, oh my word, I have to do this again. Like, I can't explain it. After my first two, I remember thinking, I am so glad I get to do this again. And they were hard. It wasn't like, it was a breeze of a delivery type of a thing, but I just felt like I am so glad that I get to do this again. And after Lillian, I just did not feel that way. I was ready to get rid of all the baby stuff. I just had this sense that I was done. And the thought of going through the pregnancy and birth and the baby phase again, for whatever reason, I just felt like, I just feel like I'm done with this, but I can't explain that. And I also like to put the caveat in, I understand for women who have struggled with infertility, hearing that is hard because you would give anything to go through it one time. And so I always put this caveat in here at this point in the story that I want to send you a big hug. I am so grateful for the fact that I was able to get pregnant quickly and easily. And just know that that is where my story began, but it's not where it ended. So bear with me that that is the initial reason we looked at adoption, the fact that I did not feel like being pregnant and going through that whole process again. But again, imperfect beginning, but that's not where the end was. So the bottom line, when we came to getting pregnant with our fourth, I just did not feel peace about it. I just felt like for some reason, I don't feel like this is for sure what I'm supposed to do. And because I got pregnant so quickly, it was not one of those things where we could just like, well, let's see what happens. So I was really praying about it. And the bottom line was it was a supernatural answer. That does not happen all the time. I wish it did. It'd be so nice if you prayed and you're like, all right, God, show me A or B. And it's like B. Okay. Most of life is not that way. And I am so grateful that when it came to this, it was. But the bottom line, I just had this supernatural experience where I was like an out of body. I just suddenly knew that my son was out there if I was willing to let God bring him to me. And it came about by watching an Instagram video of somebody I had started following and watching it was the gotcha day when they picked up their little girl in China. To be clear, there's nothing like magical about this particular video. It was just what God used to break my heart and speak to me. And I share that because everyone needs to hear your story. If you have adopted a child, if you were adopted, you have no idea how sharing your story could impact somebody else. And for me, it was that way. This mom was willing to share her daughter's story, and the Lord used that to break my heart. So anyway, one of the really cool things that I had this like instant realization, one, that my son was out there if I was willing to let the Lord bring him to me. And two, that if I chose not to adopt, that child would be okay. It was actually me who would be losing out on the blessing. Mm. And what floored me about that, like just instant revelation, was that I had gotten it all wrong for years. In my mind, adopting was all about changing the life of a child. When in reality, the beautiful blessing about adoption is how the life of that child changes everyone else.
Yeah.
And it was this amazing mindset shift because it made me realize that, yes, you are changing positively the life of that child. But at the end of the day, it is really the way that that child ends up changing everyone else's life. And I have that revelation at that moment has been affirmed again and again as I have heard other people's adoption stories. And I hosted a large gala last year. It was a fundraiser for our adoption, but it was also to highlight local adoption stories. And this truth is consistent. The life of that child is more powerfully changing everyone else's life, perhaps, than the other way around. And that's just a humbling reminder that it's really not about me. It's not about me doing this amazing thing that I'm adopting. People are like, that's so wonderful, good for you. And it's like, it is wonderful, but at the end of the day, I think I'm the one who's actually going to be the most blessed
Yeah.
out of it. So yeah, it was just incredible. My husband, and this is again where I know when things are supernatural, he's like a very long decision maker. He needs to think about it for a long time, process things. And it was like days, days. And he came to the same conclusion that, yeah, let's do this. I feel good about this. And so it really
Yeah.
took off from there.
Well, I love this unique story because I think this is exactly why I wanted you on the podcast, because we have so many different, experiences that are being brought to the show this month. And the one thing that I love is your vulnerability and honesty surrounding how this came about for you, right? Because sometimes when I share the story behind why we adopted two children, I have to really be candid, right? And I have to tell
Yeah.
people, yes, we had an infertility struggle. We had a situation, right? Like both of us were dealing with infertility issues. However, we barely scratched the surface on an infertility journey. Because
Yeah.
for us, like we personally, like we were high school sweethearts. And so we had always discussed wanting to adopt a child. That was just something that we had always wanted to do. And so when we got to this point in our 20s where, okay, what's the next step? Are we going to do IVF? Are we not going to do IVF? When we got to that point and we knew that it was at the sacrifice of perhaps my headaches that I had been just coming out of the darkness from, with my husband and I looked at each other and we were like, nope, like this is a sign that adoption is the right way for us. And so I love that you shared your story, because I think there are people out there who have the heart to adopt or to foster or whatever the case is. And they're worried that because, like, well, I have biological children, right? Like, I should feel grateful. I should feel like I should just be happy with this, right? But, or whatever you want to call it, like satisfied. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not really about that as much as like, is it in your heart to open up more love? Do you have more love to give? I think is a phrase that I've heard people share before. And it doesn't always have to be born out of a frustrating journey. It doesn't have to be born out of infertility. It could just be that you just have always had it on your heart to adopt.
Mm-hmm.
People sometimes, like I have a girlfriend of mine who they also adopted a child, and she has a biological child. And she told me one time, we had been friends for a long time, like years, right? And she told me after years of being friends, she was like, I've never told anybody this before, but the reason we adopted our first child was because I never really wanted to be pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that. And I said, that's so funny that you said that, because that is my experience. And we had never shared it with each other, because as women, it's just, it's so ingrained, right? That like women should want to be pregnant. They should want to have this experience. It's not always the case, right? So there's somebody listening to this who has biological children, who's considered adopting, but they're unsure. They're like, well, how does that look to people? Like, maybe I should just feel grateful for where I am. There's other people like me and my friend who are like, I've always maybe wanted to adopt instead of going through that pregnancy journey or whatever that looks like. So there's all different ways, my friends, to make a family. And I love that you are so honest and open about that. I'd love to hear more about sort of like the logistical side of how you started. So when you guys decided, okay, I got chills when you were sharing your story about sort of the supernatural feeling that came over you and all that. It's such a God story. But I'd love to hear more about, like, once your husband's on board, right? My husband's the same way. Like, I think that just has to happen, like in a couple, in a relationship, like somebody is the person who's
Someone has
like,
to be the slow.
I have a vision, we're doing it now. And the other person's
right.
like, I need
Put
to
on the
evaluate.
brakes.
Yeah. And so it's so funny. But anyway, so once he was on board and you guys were going to move forward, you mentioned wanting to look for, a child that was maybe already 2 to 4 years old or whatever the case is. So how did you guys go about choosing Samoa? Like, how, did you hire an agency? Like, what were your first logistical steps?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm all about the how to. So, and the messy behind the scenes. And y'all, listen, adoption is more paperwork than I've done in my life. When we talk logistics, it is a lot. I mean, this is coming from someone who has bought and sold multiple houses, who has 2 master's degrees. Like, I've been through some processes, and there is nothing as paperwork heavy as adoption. So, it's so easy to just hear the highlight reel, like, hey, we're adopting, and miss the hours and hours of details that go into it. So just know we're on the same boat. It is a process, but it's doable. If we can do it, you can do it. So where we first started, when you decide, like, okay, I'm interested in this adoption journey, one of the first questions that you have to start answering for yourself is, do I want to adopt domestically or internationally? And some of that is also integrated with the question, what age range am I interested in adopting? And the medical needs that could potentially come with that age range. These are kind of the first high level questions that you need to ask. And the reason that I say that is adopting domestically, when we started looking at the process, in my understanding, tends to be more difficult to adopt a young child or a baby, unless you have had like infertility issues or you don't have biological children. It is easier to adopt a baby domestically. Otherwise, you're looking at more the foster to adopt scenario. And we did want a younger child. So to put things in perspective, we started this process 4 years ago. And so my youngest right now is 5. So when we first started looking into this, she was 1. So at that time, we actually were looking for a young, like 0 to 2. And in order to even, and we also felt strongly we wanted a boy. And since we have 2 girls and 1 boy, that was like a reasonable course of action to us. And I'll tell you again, logistically, that was one of the upsides to adoption. Unlike biologically, we had the ability to choose a gender. And so again, like real talk, that was when we looked at like the pros and cons, like that was something that, before I had that experience where I just knew this is what we were supposed to do. Before that, that was kind of what we wrestled with. Pro to adoption is we could choose a gender biologically, obviously. We would not have been able to do that. So we knew we wanted a boy, and a young boy who was relatively able to experience life with minimal physical disability. Again, real talk, one of the most difficult things when you first start the conversation is you have to have the conversation that includes what kind of medical problems can we or can we not handle. And there's a sense of guilt that comes along with this that I think also a lot of people stop at this point, especially moms, because you feel this sense of, I should be able to take anyone. And you get this checklist and it feels like you're ordering on Amazon. And then you feel like, oh my gosh, a child is not something you order. And so there's all these convoluted feelings that come in. So this is real life. And I think it happens to every single person who goes through this process, but it doesn't mean that you should stop the process. Wrestle with the emotions, go through the steps. But that was something I wrestled with, especially as a medical professional. I struggled limiting those options and who, the child that I could accept. And I had to really work through that. But I felt strongly, because sports are such a huge part of our family, our kids are very, very active. For us, I also did not want my child to feel like a job. So ironically, because I'm medical, I felt like if I brought in a child who had significant medical needs, it would almost be this dangerous meshing of my professional job with my motherhood. And everyone has a different mindset. For some women, they'd be like, I'm perfectly suited to have a child with medical needs. So again, it's every story is really, really different. For us, we wanted a young boy who I was able to check off a lot of the medical conditions that I knew would not result in permanent physical disability. And he would be able to live a relatively active life. So that was how we initially started. Then when we had to decide domestic or international, the fact that we wanted a young boy that was relatively healthy without disabling diagnoses pretty much led us to international. And the second reason we chose international is we have both worked with orphanages in other countries. And when people ask us, why would you not adopt a child from our country? One of the primary reasons is that even though our system is broken, the foster care system is so broken and messy, there is still a system in place for orphan children in our country. When you go to other countries, the majority of them, not only do they not have a system in place, the orphanages, if there is an orphanage, is often destitute. These children have next to nothing. They barely have enough food to feed the children that are there. They usually have one set of clothing. The one that I was in, the little boy that I remember playing with for the majority of the time, smelled like urine because they don't have the resources to keep these kids clean. And they don't have the one-to-one caregivers. They don't even have a system in place within the orphanages to even be able to give individual attention to these children. So when it comes to picking between the two, there's a lot of factors involved, but for us, we just felt a pull to international adoption and this idea that at least in this country, there is some system in place, broken as it may be. A lot of other countries, there's nothing. These kids have nothing. One caregiver maybe for 30 kids.
Yeah.
So that was at least the very beginning, how we even tried to figure out international versus domestic. And then once you decide international, you're back to the Amazon scenario again, because it's like, how do I narrow down a country?
Yeah.
Like I don't even know where to start. And we're like, anywhere? Okay, that answer doesn't fly. Like you need to figure out where to even start. So I got amazing advice for any of you listening who are like, seriously, how do you choose a country? We were told to even figure out how to narrow down initially. What is a culture that you feel like you could most organically incorporate into your home? Because that's such a huge part of international adoption is, you don't want to just bring them home and then Americanize them. You basically want to bring them home to America and help incorporate their culture into your home. So for us, it was Central and South America. We both had experience. I have a lot of family from Central America. I lived in Peru. My husband's been to Guatemala multiple times. So for us, my sister's fluent in Spanish. She's a Spanish teacher. I speak Spanish proficiently. So for us, that was a great place to start. So then once we found an area we could resonate with, I started Googling adoption agencies for South America, adoption agencies in Central America. That was literally how we came to at the time they were called MLJ Adoptions, and they had a fairly heavy presence in Central and South America. Initially, I looked at Africa. Africa, you had to live in their countries for like 2 to 3 months before you could even adopt. Sometimes you had to visit twice. It wasn't realistic for our family, which is then when we started looking at Central and South America. We got to this agency who had a heavy presence. The first program that we applied for was Honduras. This is, again, real life backstory when you enter this adoption process. And we were accepted into the program. You have to apply to an agency to even be in a program. So we applied for Honduras. We were accepted, started that paperwork, only to discover like a week later that Honduras had closed its adoption policies to any child less than 7, meaning they would no longer legally let you adopt anyone from their country less than 7. And it was very eye-opening. We were like, I'm sorry, wait, what? A country can just do that? Everyone who had been on the waiting list for that country had to shift to a different program. This is really hard. This is hard. We were blessed. This was at the beginning of our process, but this is real life, you guys. Adoption is a risk of the heart. You just have to embrace that. So the next one on the list that had a child of the description we were looking for, again, it feels weird to say, but that's the reality, a young boy in the age range that we wanted. Not all countries let you choose gender. To throw that in there, that's partly how you narrow that down. Was Samoa, was their partnership with the Samoa group. And then after that, it would have been Haiti. So Samoa, that was literally how we came to Samoa. That wasn't where we started. And then once we landed in the Samoan program, we have to take all kinds of classes because you need to then be educated on the country, the culture, adoption, what it looks like, understanding the child that you adopt. If the longer he or she has been without a primary caregiver, the more developmental delay that you will see. You learn how to prepare yourself for that as best you can. And then there's ongoing education. The Samoa program was 4 to 5 years. So we started this process 4 years ago, and we are entering year 4 in January. and we are told we should be matched in year 4. Because of the long wait, we've now shifted the age to 2 to 5, which you can do during the waiting process and home study updates and all that. So that is where we're at. Little boy, 2 to 5 years old. God willing, we will find out who he is next year, but that's some of the backstory. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you went through that, because sometimes when we've talked and you've talked about this process, I haven't really understood, like, well, why is it taking that long? Like, I didn't know if it was part of the home study process or if it was just different, obviously different in other countries and things like that. So a couple of things that I want to come back to here before we move forward is, just mentioning one thing that we said to each other offline before we recorded, which is talking about this idea of domestic adoption versus international adoption, and how each person or couple has to decide what's best for them. And I just want to say to anyone listening, because I know we're going to have people listening who have considered adoption or are considering it, there's really no wrong way. There's just the right way for you, right? And so we were talking before this about how some people are very opinionated one way or the other, right? Like, they believe you should only internationally adopt, or you should only domestically adopt. What's right for you is what matters, right? And what I think what I'm hearing from your story is you knew, based on where you were in your life and what you feel capable of doing, and the perfect match for you was to go this route, right? It was to go the route of international adoption. I have a short little story I wanted to share, and this will lead me into what I want to talk about next, which is I have a family member who adopted from Russia. I think it was about 17 or so years ago, so it's been a while. And I remember him telling these stories. Of course, I'm sure the processes were different, and it's different for every country, but it was, even 17 years ago, different than it is now. Kind of like when I was born in 1983, my adoption was very simple, as opposed to now much more complex when we adopted our girls. And so anyway, I remember my cousin talking about how they had to, I think they made 2 or maybe 3 different trips to Russia, to an orphanage. And the final time that they went to retrieve their son, they had to take so much, I think it was like close to $50,000 in cash, like on their body into this. I mean, just some crazy stories on how they actually
where do you put that much cash? You're like,
I don't know.
100. How high do bills go? I'm like stuffing in my underwear, my bra. Like, what do you do with all that money?
Yes. I mean, we've heard this story over and over again, but it is crazy. And that's their unique story, but I'm sharing it because you can have different experiences, where you're adopting from. And so, but it made me think about this idea of cost associated. And that's where I want to go next, because we've talked about this. You and I have talked about this before. This is what holds a lot of people back. I find that it's either cost or emotional unpreparedness, right? This feeling of, you just said it perfectly when you said adoption is a risk of the heart. So adoption is a risk of the heart. It's also a little bit of a risk of the finances, right? So
absolutely.
Let's talk about, you said you guys had the gala, and I know that was a big fundraising event for you. So one thing that I want to make sure my listeners know is that they don't have to go into an adoption process feeling the burden of perhaps carrying the entire weight of the financial cost. There are organizations out there, I have linked to them in previous shows, and I'll do it here too, where they are literally here for that purpose, to help you raise funds for adoption. Brad Bishop is a guest on the podcast this month as well. He talks specifically about how they went about raising funds. And I think he says they spent over close to $90,000 between 2 adoptions in 2 years. And only $7,000 came out of their pocket because they were able to raise funds for their process. So if you're listening to this and cost has been the reason that you haven't moved forward, don't let that stop you. So I want you, Ahna, to talk specifically about how you guys went about raising funds for your adoption, and any details you want to give there.
Yeah. And to reiterate, I mean, cost was the number one, again, before I had that supernatural experience, on my pros list and my cons list, cost was the number one con. It is just real life. And here's also real life. We had flipped 3 houses over the course of 10 years. We worked really hard in the back end. Our dream is to build a custom home because we're passionate about having a place that, our kids' friends can come, and having that place that is safe for people to gather and host large groups. So, we've worked really hard on the back end financially to put ourselves in a healthy position where we could make those dreams come true as well in the service of others. And we're looking at this cost to adopt and thinking, does this mean we have to put all of what we've currently been working toward on hold? Like, how do we manage both? Can we do both? Does it have to be an either or? So, this is also the real life conversation that needs to happen. And some people have also strong opinions on this as well, whether or not you should be raising money to adopt, just like you wouldn't raise money to have a biological child. Should you just totally consume the cost on your own? There will be people who say that is the case. I am here to say, you talk to anyone in the adoption community, and most people, the most generous people to give to other adoptive families, are adoptive parents. It is a fierce community because we know the ins and outs of raising money, especially when you're adopting internationally. Domestic's not cheap either. So I'm here to reiterate that I do not believe adoptive families should have to be putting all of their own personal goals on hold to give a child a forever family. I firmly believe that it should not be either or, it should be both and, which is why I know Jenny and I are both passionate about trying to figure out creative ways to use our businesses to help families who want to adopt and make this financial barrier much less of a burden. So our Samoa is about a $55,000 investment. That is not too uncommon for most international adoptions right now. It would probably be, I would say, 45 to 55 on average for international. The specific group that we partnered with is a crowd funded platform, if you will, called LifeSong for Orphans. And I don't know if any of you other guests have talked about LifeSong. They are a 501c organization, and she's nodding. Okay, so I won't go into all that. But the bottom line, what makes them unique is that their administrative costs are covered by private donors. So I'm sure there's others out there, but I couldn't find them, which is half the problem with these adoption fundraising agencies is we can't find them. We can't find you. And that's a challenge. So LifeSong's a very big platform, is well known. And because of this private donorship, every dollar that you get from your donors goes to your adoption costs. And they are not taking any off the top for administration fees. That's not including credit card fees, by the way. For anyone that gets confused by that, that's a different thing. So when you see that money's coming off, that is from the credit card company. That is not the fundraising platform. So a lot of other crowdfunding platforms will take 3 to 7% off for administrative fees for their employees, for platforms, etc. LifeSong is 100%. So that is one of the reasons that we went with them. And then there's so many other, creative ways that you can go about it. So Brad is also a friend of mine. They did some really creative fundraising ideas. I hosted a gala, and the way that you can do this with any event, but basically the quote unquote ticket for the event was a donation to our adoption costs. And it was a suggested donation cost, but it was, totally up to the person coming if they wanted to meet that or go above. We made a suggested cost of $50 per person to come to the event. I engaged a lot of my local community resources. And here's the thing, you guys, people are so generous. All we hear about when we look at the news and social media, it feels very toxic and that people are just like take for themselves. But the reality is, when you truly share your story and your heart and you're authentic with people, you would not believe how quick people are to support you and your mission. But that takes a willingness to be vulnerable, to share authentically, and take bold action, really, and be willing to step out of your comfort zone. But when I organized this gala, we had so many community stores and businesses, and our dentist, for example, donated this massive, we did a raffle. I'd never done one before, and just asked for local businesses to donate baskets. I mean, I'm telling you, the people, I got calls the day of businesses being like, hey, is it too late to donate a basket? We had 20 baskets donated, and people were still calling the day of, like, hey, totally forgot. Do you still want this? And I like didn't have time to collect them all. But so try to assume that people are generous, because when you have that mentality and you want to help support a cause, or maybe you're trying to fundraise for somebody else, you just have to be willing to adopt that mindset of gratitude and authenticity and a willingness to really share your heart. And yeah, you'd be amazed how people will give. So that was one way that we raised money then. I spent next to nothing on food, by the way. We had a friend who worked for a wholesale food company, and I basically ordered all the food in bulk and went to pay for it, and he said, it's on me. Like, you guys, it's that type of thing. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
just, people are amazing. People are amazingly generous. And here's side note, by the way, there is legitimate science to show that one of the ways to feel more satisfied with life, there's so much research on this, is generosity. That there is literally the science of happiness. One of the ways to feel happier in life is to give. So when you adopt that mindset that, it is a blessing to give,
Yeah. I
it's
think,
just exponential.
yeah. I mean, when I interviewed Brad, this is something that we touched on too, and I'll make sure to link that up in the show notes. But basically, we're always so fascinated by how much people really want to serve and give.
Mm.
He tells the story in our episode about how they just had a random stranger give them write a check for like several $100s, and another person write a check for $1,000. And it's so interesting because I do think that people want to give back. I do think that people are, people have hearts, right? And sometimes we forget that. I think, when you're in line at Starbucks and somebody pays for your coffee, are you paying it for the person behind you? Right.
Yep.
Like, and
Yep.
people, it makes your day. You hear people talk about it on social media all the time, right? Like, oh my gosh, my day was made because today in the Starbucks line, like someone paid it forward to me. Someone was generous to me, and people really do want to do it. I love that. And I just think that too many people are probably being held back from making a move like adoption because they think they have to foot the full bill, and they think that it's on them, and they're not sure if they can handle it. And you talked about like life circumstances, right? I know for us, it was a matter of, do we want to pay thousands of dollars toward in vitro? Do we want to spend thousands of dollars toward adoption? Some people are in the boat where they're doing both, right?
Yeah.
And they're eager to build a family at that time in their life. So love the idea of the gala. Brad talks about how they created a puzzle that for both of their
I love
their
it's so
boys,
genius. Yeah, I love that
and
idea.
how everybody has like a piece of the puzzle and their name is on it, and it's so cool, right? Like, there's so many different ways you could go, but at the end of the day, like if someone wants to give, it doesn't matter. They can, if someone wants to give, they'll give for like a dirty sock collection. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter like what it is. We have another friend who does an annual gala here locally, and it's actually for her nonprofit organization, which is more of like a cancer associated thing, not adoption. But every year, like hundreds of people attend this gala, right? They do, what's it called when you do like raffles, right? I couldn't think of the word. When they do like raffles on like autographed jerseys, or, I don't know, whiskey bottles or whatever the case is, right? And people want to put their name down, and they want to donate, and they want to help build and fund that positive cause. So I think that if there's anything to take away from this, it's the fact that yes, adoption is a pretty penny, regardless of whether you're adopting domestically or internationally. I've covered this before, but for domestic adoptions, what I've seen, at least in my personal experience, is there's a lot more birth mother associated costs, because, leading up to infant adoption, especially, you're building a relationship with birth mom. And if birth mom is struggling to make ends meet for her life, right? Like her heating and cooling, her housing, those types of things can fall on you to contribute to. And that's different per state, depending on where you're adopting in the US. But for international adoption, right, it's going to be dependent on, is this orphanage involved? Is this, what costs are entailed for you with your travel as well? Like when you guys actually have to travel there. So there's different reasons for different costs, but from what I've understood, regardless of domestic or international, it's anywhere from $25,000 to $60,000. So asking, being willing to say, this is our heart, this is what we're looking to do, and we're looking for people to help be part of this and to help our family. I think people want to help. people don't
And I
know.
think it's adopting, because the challenge that I would put forth to any of you listening who are so intimidated by the cost, again, having just communicated that generosity promotes happiness, truly, from a scientific standpoint. And you also then need to adopt that same mentality. It's a give to give type of mentality, meaning I do feel then that if you are asking people to support, you need to give them something in return. And what that is
Mhm.
authenticity and sharing your story, is being willing to be vulnerable. That is the one thing that you can give, and making sure that you are being intentional about updating people who have given generously, thanking them profusely, that attitude of gratitude that, I mean, truly, I could not bring this child home without you. You are making all the difference in
Mhm.
bringing, and so don't sell yourself short that, well, what do I give in return? You are giving them an insight into your family's life. And so I do think there needs to be a willingness to give something back as well, and making sure that there is truly a sense of this is a partnership.
Yeah.
um but yeah, that give to give mentality, I think, is just crucial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll link up in the show notes for everyone. You mentioned Life Song, and I believe Jenny Lord, who I have on the podcast from the Chosen organization, she mentions the ABBA Fund as well.
Mm,
So both of those I will link up in the show notes so people can have ease of access to that so they can research it for themselves, but also just establishing something on your own. I guarantee that if you're listening to this, you most likely have a social media account, which means if you have a social media account, you have access to at least a few friends and family. If you have access to a few friends and family through something like social media, you have the power to raise funds. So, I mean, I see it every day, right? I just saw yesterday where a little girl who was in an accident from my hometown, they were doing a GoFundMe for her hospital
mhm.
costs, and people want to give. And it kills me because every time that I click on that to donate, I see where almost every time the goal is surpassed.
Mm.
People want to give. So yeah, so cool. Well, I know we're getting close to the end of our time, but I want to make sure that we touch on sort of, gosh, 2024 is going to be a big year for you. Not just personally, but also with the baby and or with the child and everything that's
Yeah.
happening with your family. So what are you most excited about looking ahead into 2024? And then also kind of give us a glimpse into how people can learn more about you and what you do and everything that you're
Yeah.
doing and working on. Yeah.
Yeah, Jenny and I were having this little like chat beforehand. So 2023 and 2024 will be big years. God willing, we're matched with our son in 2023 and we bring him home in 2024. But so my business, I touched on it a little bit, what I do, and my current blog at the time of this recording and website is hammersandhugs.com, hammers, letter N, hugs.com, kind of my one-stop shop, sort of the Grand Central Station for all the things that I do. But my business is undergoing a massive rebrand next year. And the through line of my business is ultimately empowering women to enjoy healthy hearts and happy homes and live holistically well across the entire person. And the problem in the health and wellness industry, speaking as a nurse practitioner and a fitness nutrition coach, is we focus on vegetables and exercise and some positive thoughts sprinkled in. When in reality, living well is a multidimensional approach. We are not one dimensional, and focusing on the physical health alone is again not incorrect, but it is very, very incomplete. And what I'm passionate about is helping women with DIY strategies based in scientific evidence, not societal influence, not what you're being told, but what research actually tells us makes a difference, to be able to implement across the entire person. That is emotional, mental, physical, social, and spiritual. All five elements of our health in order to truly thrive well on this side of heaven and fulfill your God-given purpose with more energy, confidence, and joy. So, one of the ways to do that, because we all need time to invest in ourselves. Any busy woman listening to this is, I'm not stretching it to say time is the number one barrier for all of us. We are wearing a million hats. We have been told to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first in order to better take care of those around us. But in reality, this is very, very difficult to do. And so at the expense of our own health, we make sure everyone else around us is thriving, healthy, and happy. So I have created, it is in the early stages, but I'm letting people know that it is coming, a program called Early Morning Habit. The trademark is pending, and next year it'll be rolled out publicly in September. But what it is going to be is it is really a course to help you establish an early morning routine, which is the ultimate health hack to thriving holistically well. Scientifically research strategies, it will include sleep training, quiet time, exercise accountability, and budget-friendly fashion formulas to beautify on the fly. Because I don't know about you, but I got no time for like full glam type of, not to mention I have no idea how to do it anyway. So we have partnering with some amazing people to give you like high end strategies that people are paying these women a lot of money to learn. And we are going to give it to you at a very, very budget friendly investment because we're so passionate about helping you invest in yourself because the world needs the best you with more energy and joy, confident in who you are and your worth and your infinite value that you were defined with the moment you were knit together in your mother's womb. So the through line here where this plays into adoption is running with that whole concept of putting the oxygen mask on yourself to better serve others. We are partnering. Early Morning Habit is going to partner with Lifesong for Orphans. And when you invest in yourself with the 6-week program and then the ongoing membership, in order to hold you accountable to getting your exercise done first thing in the morning, to having that quiet time where you still everything, phones off, whether you pray, meditate, read religious texts, gratitude journaling, we'll talk about all the options. But basically, in order to help you stay accountable, we are going to give you for every 6 weeks that you successfully complete your accountability log, my company is going to give you back probably up to 33% of your investment to give forward to an adopting mom. Consequently, then adopting moms can partner with the program to raise funds to bring her child home. So investing in yourself to impact others and immediately benefit from that oxygen and just materializing that concept. We've heard it, but it's so hard to really experience the benefit of that in real time. And this is a way to really help manifest that. And again, generosity yields joy. So full circle, it's coming. This is all like early stages. I'm all about bringing people along for the process, not just showing you the after, sort of the before and after photos. So this is the process that is happening will be happening over on my brand coming next year. And Jenny's going to be a part of it, man. We're already figuring out how we can.
We're working on it. Yeah.
But
so
we
I
want to
love
be
this
there for you. Yep.
I just think, yeah. And I love that it's full circle because it is what better way to hold yourself accountable than to a mission like that. Right. And it's so true. Like we've found, I mean, I know as a health and accountability coach myself, the reason people fall through a lot of the time is because there's no skin in the game or there's no true investment. Right. And as women, we are more inclined to truly invest if it's for someone else, right?
Amen.
If it's serving a big cause. So I love the way that you're connecting these two things. I love everything about what you're doing. Can you tell people, I have your website here. I know it'll be shifting next year, but we'll make sure to update as we need to.
Yeah, no worries. It'll redirect. No worries.
Yeah. Can we tell people a little bit about how to find you on social media before we wrap up?
Yeah. So my Instagram is Ahna Fulmer. Yes, like the Frozen princess, but not spelled like her. So it is AHNA FULM as in mom, ER, Ahna Fulmer. And Facebook is the same, Ahna Fulmer. And then the website actually will also be changed to Ahna Fulmer. It's like very Ahna Fulmer all over the place, egotistical. But that's basically where I am. YouTube is my podcast channel, Imperfectly Empowered. And I share a lot more about our adoption journey too. I've interviewed Jenny over there. We have some incredible adoption stories on the podcast. I mean, like just heartbreaking, get your tissues out, and also so inspiring. So any of those places, I'm there.
Great. Well, I'll make sure to link up everything we talked about in the show notes. I made lots of notes for myself today to make sure that I have lots of resources for you guys, including how to reach Ahna. There's one thing that I've learned from this episode and from even previous conversations with you. I know that we're very similar in the fact that we're very purpose-driven women, and that we really feel like when God puts something on our heart, we're going to execute, right? We are the people who are going to follow through because it is part of our purpose. So I know that there are people listening who they feel this call or this tug, or they're wondering what that is. That's the universe or God or fill in the blank for you that's pulling you to a new direction. And so be open to it, have an open heart. And I hope this episode has served you. So thank you so much, Ahna, for being here today, as always. I'm sure it won't be the last time that we touch base, either offline or on a podcast.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, and I can't wait. Can I get some like free access to like the fashion on the fly tips? Because I think I clearly need that.
Girl, come on it. You and me both. I mean, look at me, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, if you need an expert on like, fitness apparel, I'm happy to.
I am actually usually put together, by the way. I do actually have an early morning routine. That's what changed my life. But today was one of those days. Real life. Grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Grace.
Absolutely.
Grace for the moment.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. All right, friends. Well, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. We'll talk soon.